Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Increasing Scientific Literacy in Undergraduate Populations, which is sponsored by McGraw-Hill. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to just point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you should be able to follow along with the presentation materials. Along the right-hand side, you may see a Q&A panel and a chat panel. If you don't see the chat panel, you can click the button that kind of looks like a dialog cloud on the bottom portion of your screen, and you can find the Q&A in the little 3 dots button. That should have that for you. So if you don't see those, look for them there. At the end of the presentation, our speakers will take a few minutes to answer your questions, so please send in any questions you have throughout the presentation using that Q&A module. If you have any technical problems, please let me know. You can let me know through chat, and I will use that to troubleshoot the issue with you privately. Today, we're using the hashtag ACRL Choice Webinars. If you get another screen handy, shout out to us. We're at choice_reviews on Twitter. Also note that we are recording today's program, and that everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to that recording. All right, so with that, I believe we are ready to get started, and I will turn things over to Annie.
Thank you, Mark. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this panel on increasing scientific literacy in undergraduate populations. We appreciate you joining us at this busy time of the academic year. My name is Annie Prudhomme-Genereux. I am the Director of Continuing Studies and Executive Education at Capilano University in Vancouver, Canada, and I will be your moderator for this panel discussion. So what is it the discussion is about? So really what we're trying to figure out is it seems that these days student preparedness to engage in college and university work is not what it used to be. In particular, there seems to be the perception that science literacy among freshmen. So the question then becomes, how can we help our students get there? How can we help our students become comfortable using and citing suitable science references and become scientifically literate? And what we're going to propose and explore in the next hour is that the secret sauce to getting students there is a strong science faculty librarian collaboration, along with suitable resources to help the students get their bearings in the scientific literature, get them to differentiate between primary and scientific sources. So I'm going to introduce our panelists for today. We begin with a librarian science faculty pair, and they're from Bergen Community College in New Jersey. First, we have Lynn Schott. She's an associate professor. She's a reference and instruction librarian, and she is at her school the champion of the school's digital resources. And as a side note, I will say she also has degrees in psychology and engineering, so clearly she understands sciences from that perspective, in addition to the librarian perspective. Also from that school, we have Linda Wiles. Linda is an assistant professor of biology and horticulture, and she has been teaching science for over 20 years in different contexts. And so she's got lots of experience teaching science, and then we have that pair coming from the same community college. To contrast that perspective, we also have another librarian with us, that's Chris Casper. She's an instruction and assessment library at Broward College in Florida. She is noteworthy for having developed excellent relationships with the faculty, and in fact, she has been at Broward College for 25 years. And one other side note I will add is that she is Dr. Chris Casper. So these panelists have each experienced successes in helping the development of science literacy among their students, and they are here to share some anecdotes and lessons learned from their wins. A bit of note about the format. So basically, in the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to ask and then probe our panelists' opinions and experience with getting students to become more comfortable and develop their science literacy skills. As they are speaking, as they're answering these questions, if among the people that are participating in this webinar, if questions arise, please type them in the Q&A box. That's on the right-hand bottom side of your screen. Hillary, who is one of the magicians working behind the scene, will be reading through them and trying to extract some of the key messages and passing them on to me. We have reserved the last 15 minutes of this webinar to answer your questions and to try and have a discussion about those topics that matter to you. Okay, so with that, I think we are ready to begin. So we're going to start by looking at the preparedness of students for college and university work, and particularly with their science literacy. So I'm going to ask the panelists, looking back over the past several years, how has the student preparedness for college science classes changed? Has it changed? And if so, how has it changed?
So I think definitely we've had some change in preparedness. This is Lynn from Bergen Community. I've noticed, that not as many of our students coming through, let's say from high school, have really had opportunities to do research, or they're not as exposed to the vocabulary that we might expect them to have. Things like, what is a journal? What's an abstract? A review article? Many don't seem to have had much practice in taking a citation and tracing it to find source material, or even being able to recognize common publications, I think, like Nature or Science. So that tends to lead them to be not as selective about the source materials that they use. So they're not paying attention to credentials from authors. Why should we listen to this person? What do they know about the topic? And certainly the level of material as they start to get into college, and making distinctions about those things, I find are definitely some things that could use some work when they first walk in the door. Linda, what about you? You have a lot of students that come through and do assignments. What have you noticed?
Yes, I have a lot of work with librarians, both the librarian that was in charge of science before Lynn took over 2 years ago. And what I find is I agree that a lot of the students are not well prepared in terms of science literature. Part of that goes to the idea that they believe they can find everything on the internet, specifically on unverifiable resources such as Wikipedia. And initially I was requiring them to at least have .edu, .gov, .org references, and they were even having trouble with that. So I stepped it up and I said, okay, you now have to have primary resources and verifiable secondary resources. And surprisingly and gratefully enough, I find that when I push them, they do and they can access those resources, not comfortably, but they eventually come to it.
So Linda, it seems like what you're saying is that it's a matter of introducing them to the materials. Once they're introduced, they're fine, but they just don't know where to begin. It's a different way of thinking. Is that right?
Yeah, fundamentally, I think they got a little bit lazy. They were a little bit babied in high school when they really should have been pushed a little bit more. No, not all students can come up to it. Some of them, no matter how hard Lynn and I try, they just don't get the idea that everything should go back to primary research or at least valid secondary sources. But I think given the chance, and especially for some of my classes, I required a full original research project, and those particular projects, students really, really come up to the point where they can get past the abstract and they can start looking at the actual data and the fact of whether or not there are sufficient replication units to have that be even a valid primary source. So yes, they do come up to it, most of them.
Perfect, thank you. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? And everybody, sorry, it seems like Chris has dropped off the call. We have a bit of a technical difficulty. So for now, I'll just focus on the pair from Bergen Community College. So Lynn and Linda.
Sure. Yeah, this is Lynn. I'll jump in again. I think that something that's common that we've talked about many times, and I'm sure is true of other institutions. I mean, we're a two-year institution here at Bergen Community College, so most of our students, have not maybe done as much citations work as before, and so, you know, using source material properly, giving attribution is definitely a struggle, learning the different style guides and things. And, you know, it's a doable hurdle for them to get over, but I think sometimes the nuances of why it's important and not just it's a task to be accomplished. And also, again, building into them the idea that this is common practice in the sciences. And I think that's, you know, important. And I know from Linda, we work on a number of different assignments, and one of the ones is, you know, incorporating both text and illustrations, and certainly, you know, using citations on formats that are less common is definitely challenging for students. I think she'd agree on that.
All right, so we're going to switch gear a little bit now and talk about the librarian-science faculty relationship and its importance in helping students develop science literacy. Bergen Community College has been selected to be part of this panel discussion because they have been particularly good at developing those relationships. I'm wondering if you can speak to how were you able to develop those relationships in the first place? How did you approach a stage of forming those relationships?
Great, Annie. So this is Lynn, and I'll just say that, you know, it's been a process to be able to say that over the last 18 years I've been at the college, and I would say probably within the last 5 or 6, we've really had kind of a large increase in the number of, let's say, library instructions and other interactions with our STEM coursework. Not to say that they hadn't existed before, but the numbers of them have certainly increased. And I think that's in part due to the fact that, you know, we listened to the faculty members and realized that one-size-fits-all was not going to cover it. I think a lot of times an approach that a librarian might take with any subject area really is kind of coming in from the, you're going to have a research paper, let's help with that. And, you know, that doesn't really always fit into a science syllabus, the outline of the course. You know, there's not a lot of room sometimes to devote an entire class period to a library session. Or, you know, quite honestly, the faculty member may not really want to grade a 5-page research paper in addition to covering the regular material, doing the laboratory work from week to week. And so I think being open to customizing and having, you know, maybe it's a short kind of introduction to what we can do to help. Maybe not requiring them to come to the library for the session, but going into their classroom has also been a benefit for us in terms of collaboration. I started out with just a few folks in the physics department in my kind of getting the ball rolling, and 2 different faculty members had 2 very different perspectives about what they were hoping to accomplish in terms of a collaboration. One physics professor came from industry and later in his career decided to join us as a professor. And he was really interested in making sure that students were incorporating outside sources beyond their textbook as part of their laboratory experiment reports. And, you know, he had had that requirement for a little while. He wasn't satisfied with what was coming through. And so we had some conversations about what it was that the library could do to try to promote some of our existing library databases to, you know, provide an easy way for students to see that incorporating outside sources wasn't necessarily a difficult thing to do if they, you know, had some awareness of what was out there and what would be considered appropriate as a good level of source to supplement what they had in terms of knowledge. So for them, you know, it was a short and sweet. I go to the classroom and we talk for maybe 20 minutes and then they're on their way and they have a face that they've connected with so that they know who to go to in the library and work on things. We certainly emphasize, you know, getting the citations right and making sure that their attributions are accurate. And so that was great. And we actually started that with the high-level physics class because that was where he had made the request for the outside source material to be. But our calc-based physics is actually a 3-semester sequence here at Bergen. And so we actually graduated and incorporated level 1 and level 2 as well over time. So that's been something that's been kind of a good opportunity. But on the flip side, I have a different physics professor who also teaches geology, and he brings in a full-on research paper. It's maybe only 3 to 5 pages. It's not necessarily like you would think of an English paper, maybe of a 5 to 10. But he really has it as a graduated assignment. They hand in drafts, and we work through a whole process of getting students to pick their topics, and through the drafts, bring in the source materials. And so we do a full class period library instruction to get them thinking about where their sources should come from. And so, having that variety and talking to the faculty members and doing some of that customization has been key to some of the collaborations. With biology, with Linda and some of her colleagues, I only came on board about a year ago working with them because we did have a different librarian that retired, and they have a number of different assignments that we work on through one orientation session at the early part of the semester, because it's meant to be a building block for, you'll come back to this as you get to the different assignments. And so introducing journal articles and primary source materials, talking about relevant websites and things like that are part of what we can do. So, Linda, I think you talked a little bit about it, but maybe you can expand too on how that has worked in terms of the work with both my predecessor and with me and getting the students on board.
I believe that's worked very well. We're very, very pleased overall, both Dr. Fisher, who was head of our unit, as well as myself, very pleased with the interaction that we've had with the library. I will say that they've been very, very helpful in terms of not just the databases online, but also in terms of bringing in print resources that we have on hand for the students for reference and for our own reference. And those have been very valuable as well. What I really, really like is the fact that if a student misses the library sessions, that they can go back to them, or if they wanted to recall something, because they post those on the library website as well.
So I'm here, actually, if I can dive in real quick. This is Chris from Broward College. Hi, everyone. My apologies. Our internet went down at the entire college, so timing is everything. But I've made it back. So I just wanted to piggyback on Lynn and Linda and add that, being able to customize has really been helpful and key when working with our science faculty. I've worked with a chemistry professor who really wanted to just bring things down to the bare minimum because she had such a full syllabus. But she felt pressure that she had to give up an entire class period. And when I let her know that, no pressure, we can do something in 20 minutes, really targeting exactly what the students need, she felt so relieved. And we've been able to follow up with the students afterwards with one-on-one student appointments and really making sure that they have exactly what they need as far as accessing the databases to find articles. But then I have another biology professor I've worked with for the past 3 years, and we set up a full session where we actually workshop her assignment. So I only speak for about 10 or 15 minutes, providing the students the rest of the class period to do hands-on instruction and digging into the research. And then I and another librarian will work with those students right there during the class period and just sort of workshopping their assignment right there. So being able to customize, as Lynn said, has been incredibly helpful. And just kind of shifting that perspective of what a library instruction can be can definitely lead to more successful collaboration.
Yeah, Chris, and I find it interesting too because by being open to that, I've actually had some continuing conversations this summer with the one physics professor who does the research assignment. That's the full paper, because he actually wants to have a second library session where we can do a little bit more dive into website and information evaluation, because he's noticed from the reports that students have put in, that they're still finding that to be a weak spot. And so again, like that ongoing conversation and trying to think about, new approaches and what else is beneficial, I think serves us all pretty well.
Yes. So I think if I was to attempt to summarize what the discussion here, what I'm hearing is the importance of conducting what effectively is a needs assessment with a faculty that a librarian wants to engage, and try to figure out what it is that they need, and from that develop a customized plan. What would here? I think one of the, so I used to be a science faculty myself. One of the things that I really liked about the librarians coming into my classroom was that they offered my students a safe space to learn about science, science citations, because, you know, the librarians were not grading the students' work, so that tended to be a safe space for the students to learn. Now, if we were to look at developing those relationships from the other side, what are some of the challenges that you experienced in developing that rapport in those relationships?
So I would say, this is Lynn again, that one of the things is actually packing your patience along the way. I think when I first started out as a librarian and faculty member, I had expectations from my colleagues in the library that, you know, I needed to be working with a lot of the science faculty. And at that time, I had a number of faculty members in the sciences that I was partnered with who had been at the college for a while and really were kind of set in their routine of what their class would look like. And they were not particularly excited about the idea of trying to incorporate something new or different just because I was saying, you know, it was possible. And so I think, you know, having some room for the fact that maybe not everybody is ready to have that kind of conversation, or now may not be the best time, you know, that can be challenging to you because you may have the energy to want to do it and do it now, but you may need to wait a little bit. Oftentimes there are opportunities that'll crop up if you, you know, keep your eyes and ears open. Maybe a grant gets approved and all of a sudden there's an opportunity, or you do have a newer faculty member who's tenure track, and so that may present an opportunity for a collaboration where someone who perhaps has been established for a little while may not feel quite as open to that partnership in that way. I don't know, Chris, what about you?
Absolutely, and I think attending, we've heard this, we know this, but attending pathway or departmental meetings, meeting the new faculty, I'm very old school. I walk the halls and just say hello and talk to the faculty, see what their needs are and where I can best fit in. And like you said, sometimes it's challenging. They're not ready for that step yet. So sometimes I'll offer an alternative, you know, letting them know that, well, you can refer your students to me and we can schedule one-on-one appointments with the students. So it's outside of class time and I can work with the students as a group or individually. I often encourage faculty to provide extra credit because that will, you know, really inspire the students to come in and meet with us in the library. It can be challenging to get the faculty to open up and let us into the classroom. So sometimes coming in from a student perspective can be really helpful and say, well, can we meet with the students, or have the students go over to the library right after class and I can work with them right after class, or meet with them in our Academic Success Center in the Science Lab. So sometimes we will set up shop in there and meet with students who are in there being tutored, but they also need help with their research and their citations. So we do a lot of collaboration with the ASC as well.
Okay, so I think you've each talked a little bit about some examples in your context that were particular success stories that demonstrate how a science faculty librarian collaboration led to success in your students. But I'm wondering if I want to give you the space a little bit to talk about, share one success story that might inspire the participants in this webinar to perhaps take on a similar project in their own environment.
Well, travel opportunities might be one reason. Actually, we were able to work on collaboratively a poster session with with the geology professor, and so that actually afforded me the opportunity to go to a GSA conference, and that gave me an opportunity to also hear and sitting in on some of the educational sessions directly from additional faculty members. You know, your folks locally obviously are the ones that are of most interest to you in interfacing, but it's great to get those perspectives, and sometimes that's not always easy to do on your library budget. But if you get a poster out there, it's a good opportunity for you also to get a different perspective and to learn kind of what's of interest in the particular field. So again, that's a nice way to work through.
Yeah, I agree. This is Chris from Broward College, and I had a similar experience working with a geography professor. As it happens, the college was offering grants through an Aspen Award that we were awarded about a year ago. And the geography professor and I collaborated and worked on infusing information literacy into her geography classes and using GIS, Geographic Information Science. And we used the software in the class, but we also brought in information literacy aspects because they had to write a research paper based on the mapping that they used this geography software to do. So it was a nice collaboration. We won the grant award and also did poster sessions throughout the college to kind of promote the awareness of information literacy, of scientific literacy, and promoting how well our students did using this software to produce maps, demographic maps, thematic maps, and writing their research paper based on their findings with the maps. So the students were successful in creating their own personal data and then bringing that together in producing a paper, researching the data, and then writing the paper. And so we had a really nice success story with that collaboration. So that was also a really good way to get the word out about the collaboration and working with other faculty.
All right, I'm going to switch gear a little bit in terms of the question and switch to the resources that can help students with scientific literacy. Going to do that. I'm seeing the questions rolling in from participants, and there are quite a few of those, and I have a feeling we'll pick them up again in the questions later on. But I'm going to first turn my attention to the librarians and say, librarians, when it comes to selecting a science database for your undergraduates, what do you look for in a product?
Well, this is Chris from Broward College, and one of the things that we look for, and I know students really need help with, are citations. So having citation tools within the database is really important. And that includes the CSC version of the citation style for scientific citing. Also having multiple ways of getting a copy of the article, such as emailing or printing. A lot of our faculty want our students to bring in a hard copy of the article. But one of the biggest things that we really look for is having those topics available. Students really, they seem to be struggling with just coming up with a topic idea for their paper. And so being able to go into a database and just having topics listed right there. One of the nice things about Access Science is they have those topics right there front and center at the top. So students can browse through those topics and get some ideas and then dive right into the articles right away. And that just really helps them with getting started and sort of take some of the anxiety off when they're facing their research paper.
Yeah, this is Lynn, and I'll jump in. I absolutely agree that especially for new students, young students, having the topic lists is really vital because, you know, if you've got the world to choose from, it's overwhelming for most of them. And so if you can give them even just a list to start from, it's a great jumping off point. I like the fact too, I mean, if we're looking at Access Science, when you go through, you also typically have, you know, a small number of results for any given topic, as opposed to everything that the world has ever written about the topic. And certainly for someone who's kind of just getting their feet wet in the sciences, I think that's very helpful to not be overwhelmed. And yes, citations, convenience, are key to the students and certainly to the librarians too, to be able to have those kinds of value added components when we're investigating different database collections. That's, you know, huge. I think that for students, anything that makes their job easier, so if there's mobile accessibility and all that, that's generally helpful to them. You know, content-wise, of course, at the community college in particular, you know, we like to have a range of levels of information. So we would like to have something that's more introductory, something that's kind of mid-range, and something that's more intense and journal-driven when the finances allow for that. And so, you know, databases that can offer those extra tools, clear references, well-identified currency of information, attribution of the articles, you know, makes it very easy for us to show the students why it's beneficial to use. And, you know, it helps them to streamline their process. I think a lot of times the battle for us with students is to just say that, you know, it's using a new tool that may be not familiar to you, but with a little bit of practice, it's just as easy. In fact, maybe, you know, obviously better for you in some ways than just doing a free web search and getting overwhelmed, because you've got quality information in front of you, well attributed. And so those things can make a difference in terms of the sources that we would choose. I would also say that, some of our assignments are not just about the information, but about the illustrations and the visual cues to the information. And so databases that we have made selections on to use as well, if they have things like diagrams or illustrations, and can those easily be cited? And so Access Science does fit that category along with one of our others. And I think that, Linda in her coursework, I think in particular, I know that the bio students, the horticulture students, are required to add additional materials in terms of visuals. And so I think that, that's been an easy way for us to get them involved in using some of the library databases as well.
Linda, is there anything you'd like to add on this from a science faculty perspective?
From a science perspective, can you hear me?
Yes. So basically, when you're selecting a science database to help your undergraduates become more familiar with science literacy, what is it that you look for?
It depends on what level they're at. Like as I said before, a number of students come in and have no clue how to use resources, even the most basic ones. So for those, I would want to have them start out with something where they have verifiable information, such as secondary resources like Access Science, Science Direct. Some of those are very valuable in terms of getting students up to speed, at least on the basic parts of a given assignment and topic to begin with. I also like the idea, and I'm sort of broad-based. I strongly believe in having good actual physical books as references when they're verifiable, and not some of the alternative pseudoscience materials. I like to have an assortment of science journals, specifically ones directly related to the topic that they're dealing with. Some of those certainly can be easily accessed online. Others of them, I feel actually having a physical copy is beneficial, at least for me. Like I have a science magazine journal that I belong to that I like to have both the physical copy as well as the online version. So I think there can't just be one type of resource. I think there needs to be an assortment of different resources to access from. As Lynn mentioned, biology, horticulture is a very, very visual type of science, and I think it's very important to be able to have the illustrations that are valid and correctly labeled, and having photographs are actually of the item that they say there are. And a lot of times when students do online searches, they just pick the first picture, not realizing a lot of times these things are mislabeled or not of high quality.
Thank you, Linda. So I'm wondering let's say we've picked a resource, a wonderful resource to use. Do you have any tips or tricks or particularly successful exercise or activity that you've used in your classroom or as you visited a classroom with the activities to help students gain confidence in their abilities to use the scientific literature? And Chris has been writing to me in the behind the scenes. She wants to tell us about an example about science writing contest. Chris, do you want to tell us about this? Hello, Chris?
I'm not sure if that was me. Are you sure that was me?
Oh, perhaps I got actually passed on by somebody else. Okay, so maybe we'll do that in the discussion. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. But are there
no worries
of activities that you have used with students to get them to become familiar with the materials?
Linda, Wiles here. One of the things that I really find most beneficial, and some students really get into it more than others, is I actually have them do a research project where it's not like a lab assignment per se. It's actually a real research project where they don't know what the results are going to be, and I don't know what the results are going to be, where it's a complete unknown. And I think they really, really enjoy some of those. Initially, a lot of them are a little bit overwhelmed by it, but once they understand that they take small steps towards it, they can actually do it. And that's what I want to have my students understand, is that research shouldn't be just for full-fledged scientists. Research is something that each of us is innately capable of. And I want them to get to that point.
Anybody else have a tip or a trick or specific tool or activity that they use to make sure students get it and use the databases to learn about science literacy?
I don't know if I have a tip or trick.
Go ahead, Lynn. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
This is Lynn. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say, I'm not sure if it's a tip or a trick, but I really try to encourage as much as possible that one opportunity that we have in the classroom with the students is probably not sufficient, that they really should be prepared to come back and have the conversations later. And this summer we had a number of students who were doing some research through our STEM programs that were running special projects and things of that nature. And part of their assignment was to actually produce an article at the end of that, and they were supposed to have done a literature review as part of the process. So we were having conversations at the beginning of the summer as they were getting into the idea of what is this going to entail, what do I have to do, translate what they're asking for me to accomplish. But you know, having that engagement then with students throughout the course of the summer, you know, a few of them got past being timid and started to send emails with questions, or, you know, I found this, I know we were in this database, but I don't know what I'm looking at. So like, can you help me with that? And I think that, you know, a lot of the opportunities for learning are not going to be in that 20 minutes or that 75 minutes that you get at the front end, but really trying to underscore the fact that it's important for them to feel that they can come to you and have that dialogue later. And even if that's not in person, but if it's, you know, an email exchange, a chat exchange, a phone call, just to get them over the humps, you know, as you have repeated conversations, the light bulb goes off and they do become much more confident. And so I would just say, you know, to be as open to that as possible and try to encourage students. I know it takes a lot for them to kind of get past the fact that they're asking for help, but many of them, once they've gotten past that, find it to be, you know, really helpful to them.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to have a final question for the panelists, and I'm going to turn our attention now to how do we know that we are making a difference, right? So how do we know that what we're doing is actually helping students with science literacy? How do you guys monitor that?
So, this is Chris here and at Broward College. So we do so in a couple different ways, I guess, one a little more formally, one a little less formally. So more formally, whenever we go into a class to do a presentation, we get students' names and ID numbers. We keep all the data protected, of course, and we track retention. We track, you know, are they successfully completed the course for all of our students in all of our classes. So on a broader perspective, and then specifically in the science classes, we can see, you know, have these students been retained? Have they successfully completed the course? And we can look at those students versus the ones that maybe did not have a library instruction session for their biology class or chemistry class, et cetera. On a, you know, less formal note, I usually can tell I have students coming in with a one-on-one library instruction sessions, signing up, they come in and just say, oh, you came to my class. And so there's a lot of anecdotal ways that we can follow students. And I keep track of those who do come in who've had a library instruction or have not had library instruction, but they come in with one-on-one appointments to also see, have they successfully completed the courses? Are they being retained to the next term? Just to keep track of this information to make sure that we are reaching the students. And we also do focus groups every once in a while with our students in different disciplines, and science being one of them certainly, to see how can we better reach our students and encourage them to come in and, you know, use our services and take advantage of us and our assistance to help them.
Thank you, Chris. Does anybody else have any other feedback on how they assess whether what they're doing is working?
Yeah, go ahead, Linda.
Okay. Yes, basically what I do is I have a series of assignments for my students throughout the term, and I look at what they do at the beginning of the term, and I look at what they do produce it towards the end of the term. And I can see a definite improvement in terms of their understanding of what a good reference is and proper citation. As I said, there's variability in terms of them being able to do that, but that's expected. Just the fact that overall there is an improvement from the beginning to the end, and I believe that says a lot for the instruction on the library.
Thank you. All right, so we are going to switch gears a little bit and switch to your questions, the questions that the participants have been feeding us. This by no means means that the time for posting a question is over. So as the questions occur to you, please enter them into the Q&A box, and then we'll hopefully get to it. So panelists, here comes the first question. I'm going to just read it. Some scientific primary sources are very technical. How do you enable students to overcome their lack of comfort with these sources? Even librarians can be confused sometimes with the technical jargon.
This is Linda Wells. I very much agree that some of them are highly technical, even as a scientist looking at fields that aren't familiar to me. What I usually do and what I recommend my students to do is to, again, address a secondary resource rather than a primary resource to get up to speed on the basics. And then I tell them to, if they can't understand the whole paper, can they understand the elements of the paper? Can they understand enough of the abstract that they get a feel for what's going on? Can they look at the materials and methods, look at the populations that are involved that have been examined? Just break it down into parts that are easier to understand, even if they can't understand the whole thing. Between that and having the secondary resource as a help, they can get enough of it that they can work with it. That's where I come from for it, and that's my advice to them in general.
Do the librarians have any other feedback about how to get non-specialists comfortable with the highly expert literature?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially, this is Lynn again, I'm sorry, at the two-year school, we're trying to get them not to get frustrated when they hit that first article that is difficult, and to say that, everyone else is having a similar experience as they begin. Obviously, getting used to the idea of screening through abstracts for language as a start, and as Linda suggested, not every part of every article is going to be digestible. So when you start hitting statistics and you're not sure what's being said there, who can you partner with? Who can help you through that? And so, maybe that is dialogue back with your subject's professor. Maybe that is just finding a different article on the same topic that is not as dense. And so I think, there's not a one-size-fits-all response, but I think allowing them to feel like there's room for them to still get through the material, but maybe in a different manner.
All right, we're going to switch over to the next question, and this next question is actually appearing in several forms, so it seems to be something that's bubbling up to the surface. I'll just read one version of it. Do you need to be a science faculty member to be taken seriously or maybe not, sorry, do you need to be a faculty member to be taken seriously in the academic library profession? So this is a political question.
So this is Chris at Broward College, and at our college we have faculty status, but we are considered non-teaching faculty. I think there's elements of this at every college, at every university, something we as librarians face in our field. It varies, and I think it varies from discipline to discipline, to be honest. Some of my departments take us very seriously and encourage us to be very collaborative within that department. That's a tough one, but they do see us as faculty, they accept us as faculty, but there's still that sense of, well, you're faculty, but a little different. So we're constantly, working and striving to show that we are collaborating with them in all disciplines. We're multidisciplinary faculty. That's how we sort of present ourselves. and by attending the department meetings, the pathway meetings, because we're very career pathway oriented here, and being active in with the college and on many levels through general education, all the way through SACS accreditation. We're on the committee, we're involved. Our faculty senate president is a librarian. So, you know, we kind of make sure that they do take us seriously. So I think just that involvement level and being engaged is really key as to how they, the faculty, the teaching faculty perceive us.
So I'm going to say the engagement is definitely a component. I'm going to throw a question to both Lynn and Chris here. So, you know, Lynn, you have a science background. You have an engineering degree, you have a psychology degree, and Chris, you have a PhD. Do you think that those backgrounds helped you to open doors, or do you think that that was not really a factor, it was more the behavior that you demonstrated?
This is Lynn. I think for some people it does make a difference, and I think you're just going to run into a variety of folks who latch on to different kinds of things. I mean, personally, I feel like more of the collaboration and the benefit of you know, getting to know people, having them know you, the respect that we would hope to see across you know, the library and the academic areas is more to me on the individual, interpersonal than necessarily your background. But for some faculty members, they need that as the pre-filter to before they have that conversation. So I'm not to say that that's an absolute everywhere, but I think as you run into individuals, you may find that can make a difference. But I don't know, Chris, at Broward, do you feel?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. I think for the most part it is behavioral, and as you get to know people and they get to know you, there's an acceptance that you're the expert across all disciplines. You're an expert in, you know, your field of library science. Having the doctorate's degree, sometimes, as you said, with the pre-filtering, that has opened a few doors with some faculty members, some administrators as well, probably more so with the administration than with the faculty. But overall, I would say it's really more behavioral based, and just, again, being engaged and meeting with faculty one-on-one so they get to know you and learn that, hey, I've been here for 25 years. I've worked with students over 25 years doing assessments, doing instructions, working with curriculum, and just being involved and engaged. And that really seems to clinch things with our faculty.
All right, we have a question coming in about, let me just read it. So should students in first-year courses be expected to use scientific peer-reviewed literature and paper when they're not supported in understanding the information they're encountering in the articles? Or do you think this type of literature is best taught by science professors in the context of a science class? So I guess maybe another way to rethink the question is, should first-year students already be diving into the primary literature, or should we just introduce them gradually and start with secondary literature and they can get to primary literature later on?
This is Lynn. I guess I would just say it depends on the emphasis. I don't think it's wrong to introduce primary literature to someone who is in their first year of school. I think it's how much emphasis you place on that overall, because I would agree that, you know, if it's an introductory class and it's an early in their process student, you know, the retention or the level of detail that they'll be able to consume is going to be very different than if they're in their third semester, their fourth semester, that kind of thing. But I don't think it's wrong to say that that literature exists and what impact and importance it would have. I just might personally not expect them to digest as much at that level, but you know, maybe Linda or Chris would like to add that.
Yeah, this is Chris at Bergen College. So I would absolutely agree. I think, you know, a little more slowly introduction, but definitely giving them the exposure to primary sources I think is important. And what does peer-reviewed mean, and why is that important? I see that in some of our introductory classes. Oftentimes what faculty will do is they'll just require one of the sources to be a primary source, peer-reviewed, but then the other sources, they're more open to having those be secondary sources. So maybe just a brief, opening the door to what a primary source is or peer-reviewed source is a nice introduction for students, because they will be working with those types of sources as they go further along in their college career. But it has to be with the understanding, as Lynn explained, that this is just an introductory course, so there may be some missteps there, and having the support system there for them, the librarians, to support the students with their research on that would be really helpful, I think, to make sure that they're successful with finding the appropriate sources.
I'm gonna see if I can pool the wisdom of the room here. Do you guys have any advice for new STEM librarians? Something that you wish you had been told earlier in your career that you learned maybe the hard way, but that you know now?
I'm trying to, this is Lynn. Congratulations, first off, on being a STEM librarian. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's any one nugget that's jumping to the top for me. As I said, I guess in my earliest of days, I think, your energy and your approach may be different from the audience that you're working with. And so I would just, again, kind of maybe say, be patient, because the time will come when things will come together. If you're having a great experience right off the bat, then that's wonderful. But for me, I think if somebody had just, kind of indicated that it might take some time to get established, it might take time to build those relationships, and not to expect something right out the gate to work perfectly. I think that was an important thing for me to take on.
Yeah, this is Chris. I would say definitely getting to know your program, definitely getting to know the journals that are most heavily used within the program, and some of the subject areas that are, really focused on as far as the degree programs. Getting to know the faculty and the administration within the science department, the hard sciences department. For instance, we have one associate dean who oversees all of the sciences. So getting to know the administrator, getting on their calendar, checking in with faculty, definitely. That's a good way to get started, so that you get to know your faculty, they get to know you, and they know that they can call on you when they need your assistance to help. It could be, students individually, or to come in and work within the classroom. But also getting to know the subject area, making sure you're familiar with those particular, especially if you don't have a STEM background. Like, I don't necessarily have a STEM background, but I work with all of my disciplines here on campus. So I make sure I'm aware of, what are the primary journals that my faculty are reading and looking at. So I'm just aware of this and doing some reading in those journals from time to time. So I'm knowledgeable of what are some of the hot topics that are happening, because that's exactly what students want to work with too, or what are the major hot topics that are happening within their field of biology or within chemistry or physics. And that way I can speak to those topics and help the students explore those topics more in depth.
I'm trying to find, there was a question that would build on what you just mentioned there, Chris. Something about, and I'm trying to find it right now, but it was something about how do you help students build a topic list that's narrow enough that they can actually go and go research it?
For me, and this is Chris, for me, it's and I'm trying to make sure I understand the question. They're building a topic list. So if they are coming
I found the question, if that's helpful.
Oh,
Chris,
please.
I found the question.
Thank you.
How do you guide students toward making a list from a topic list narrow enough to be relatable and important to the student?
So is this a topic? I'm just trying to make sure I understand the question properly. Is this a topic list that the student is developing, a list of topics that they're going to be researching, or how they take one topic and focus that and narrow it for their particular paper?
Unless the person writes to us and tells us right now, I think you're going to have to go with it.
I'm going to wing it. As part of librarian working with students, and if I'm working with a student one-on-one, or even when I'm in my classes, I always ask the students in general, what topics are we all working on today? And, oftentimes they'll throw topics out at me, and they're quite often very broad. Or they're like, well, I want to do this topic, but I'm kind of interested in this other topic as well. Sometimes they're related, sometimes they're not. So I really have to just discuss with the student and sort of get them to focus on what they're interested in and make them aware. And this again goes back to my knowledge of the subject area. As I was saying, reading, different articles, being very knowledgeable of these different subject areas so that I can ask them the questions to help them focus and narrow their topic down, or to help them decide between different topics. They might be really stuck on 2 or 3 different topics, and they love all 3 topics. They want to explore all 3. So I said, well, play with Google a little bit, see what your results are. But then once you see the topic sort of bubbling up and the direction you want to go, then let's shift our focus and go into the databases, because you need to find more academic scholarly sources for your paper. And I always tell it as a bonus that the database will provide the citation for you, whereas the internet sources will not necessarily have that or necessarily have it accurate. And you can rely on the databases for that accurate academic information. So a lot of it for me is really reading up and being knowledgeable of the subject area, so I can help the students then by asking them questions. Well, did you think about it from this perspective? Are you doing an argumentative paper? And just helping them sort of drill down to the topics. So they have a thesis statement that they can then pursue and find information on that statement.
So I think we have time for maybe 2 quick questions. The first one is, when teaching students about verifiable sources to use, do you prefer to integrate lessons into your already planned class time, or do you think a separate or specific presentation by the science librarian is necessary?
This is Linda Wiles. I believe that it's more beneficial to have both. We have Lynn Schott give the original information for the students. I, throughout the semester, give them additional resources, refer them back to her for any expansion on those. So I think it's important to have both.
Do any of the librarians want to pronounce themselves on that? Should it be a separate standalone, or should it be integrated as part of the class?
I mean, this is Lynn. I'll just kind of piggyback on what Linda said, because I think, especially again with our students, as much reinforcement as you can have about approaching these things. If they hear it from more than one person, it becomes somehow more believable than if it's just one person that's told them something. So that's kind of what comes to mind.
Yeah, I'll jump in too. This is Chris. We really try to work with scaffolding our instructions. And again, it goes back to how much time does the professor have for the course, and we respect that completely. But if a professor is able to bring us in 2, even 3 times sometimes, where maybe the first time is just a quick 15-minute introduction, so they put a face with a name, just how to schedule appointments, what our services are, and then maybe coming back a second time to start focusing on either 1 of 2 assignments, or to start them off with the research, and then perhaps coming in a 3rd time, we can do some workshopping, helping students who are struggling with the research, maybe helping with citations. So we really encourage and love the idea of doing something that's scaffolded. And as Lynn said, coming in multiple times, that's always really beneficial for the students. They get to know us better. And we find with our faculty that they definitely see improvement on the papers as well when they're able to have us come in several times and the students get the chance to ask questions right then and there at the point of need.
Okay, I'm going to ask one final question, but we have like 60 seconds left, so you're going to have to be quick about it. But I think this is an important question. What role should a librarian play to improve the usage of any database that institutions have spent money to subscribe to?
This is Linda Wiles. From my understanding, databases are extremely expensive to access, especially for a large college. So I think it's very important to be very judicious in which ones to bring on and which ones to perhaps cancel, which ones to maintain. And that the librarian would have to be working directly with the science and other faculty to determine that.
Yeah, this is Lynn. I think just having the database is definitely never enough. You have to be out there and talking about it, connecting the dots for people so that they know that it's findable, that it has import to assignments and things like that. You can't just say it's on a list, somebody will find it. You really do have to take an active role in pushing and finding niches. So working through assignments and saying, this one's good for this reason, use it for this particular focus. And the more that you do that, then it becomes on someone's radar, a student who comes back in a different semester. Oh, I remember it from last semester. And then that, will pay dividends down the road.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Thank you, guys. So I'm gonna wrap this up because it's the time we've had allocated for this webinar. So I'd like to thank Lynn, Linda, and Chris, your panelists for this webinar, to share their time and their expertise. I'd like to thank Mark for his wonderful IT support behind the scenes, Hillary and Access Science for sponsoring this discussion and making it possible for us who have a common interest in helping students become science literate, engage in the discussion. And finally, I'd like to thank you all for participating in this discussion and submitting your wonderful questions. So happy back to school, and I guess we'll see you at the next webinar.
Great. Thank you, Annie. This is Mark. I would just toss out a quick reminder to folks that they can be on the lookout for the recording to this program sometime tomorrow morning, probably. And if they have a moment to fill out the quick survey that they should be able to find in their chat box there, we would really appreciate their feedback. So thank you, Annie, and thank you, Lynn and Chris and Linda. It's been a really great presentation. We will hopefully talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Mark.